The auction block stood in the center of Genoa, Nevada, casting a long shadow across the dusty town square as the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the crowd gathered below. Victoria Owens held her 6-month-old daughter closer to her chest, feeling the baby's breath against her collarbone as men with calculating eyes examined them like livestock. And she wondered how her life had spiraled so completely into this nightmare where human beings could be sold to satisfy debts they never rightfully owed. The auctioneer, a portly man with sweat staining his shirt in dark patches, cleared his throat and gestured toward Victoria with all the ceremony of someone selling a horse. "Now, gentlemen, we have here a healthy young woman, 22 years of age, and her infant daughter." The woman's late husband owed considerable debts to several establishments in town, and as his widow, she inherits those obligations. Strong back, can cook and clean, and the child is quiet enough. We'll start the bidding at $50 for the pair. Victoria's cheeks burned with humiliation as she stood there in her faded calico dress, her dark hair falling loose from its pins after the rough handling she had endured being dragged to the platform. Her daughter, Emma, squirmed in her arms, oblivious to the horror of their situation. This could not be legal, Victoria thought desperately, but in this remote Nevada town in 1869, the law seemed to bend whichever way the powerful men wanted it to bend. $50, called out a grizzled rancher whose reputation for cruelty to his workers was well known. Victoria's stomach turned. She had heard the stories about that man, how he worked people until they collapsed, how his last housekeeper had fled in the night with bruises covering her arms. 60. Another voice joined, this one belonging to the saloon owner who had been one of her late husband's creditors. She closed her eyes, praying for some miracle, though she had stopped believing in divine intervention 3 months ago when Thomas had been found dead in a ditch, his body broken from what the sheriff had ruled an accidental fall from his horse. Victoria knew better. Thomas had been gambling with dangerous men, borrowing from loan sharks, making promises he could never keep. She had begged him to stop, but he had always believed the next game would be the one to change their fortunes. 65, the rancher countered. The auctioneer nodded, his gavel ready. 65 going once, $200. The voice cut through the murmuring crowd like a knife through butter, deep and steady and brooking no argument. Every head turned to see who had made such an outrageous bid. Victoria's eyes flew open and found themselves locked on a tall man standing at the edge of the crowd, his broad-shouldered frame outlined against the afternoon sun. He wore typical cowboy attire, dusty from travel, with a black hat pulled low over his eyes. But there was something different about him, something in the set of his jaw that spoke of determination and perhaps a trace of anger at what he was witnessing. The auctioneer's eyes widened with greedy delight. $200. Now that is a serious bid, sir. Do we have any counters? The crowd had gone silent. $200 was more than most men in Genoa made in 6 months. The rancher scowled and shook his head, stepping back with a muttered curse. The saloon owner threw up his hands in disgust. 200 going once, twice, sold to the gentleman in the black hat. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that made Emma startle and begin to cry. Victoria bounced the baby automatically, her mind reeling as she tried to process what had just happened. She had been sold, like property, like cattle. The reality of it made her knees weak, but she forced herself to stand straight, to maintain what little dignity she had left. The tall cowboy approached the platform, counting out bills from a worn leather wallet. He handed the money to the auctioneer without a word, his face hard and unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat brim. Then he turned to Victoria, and for the first time, she saw his eyes. They were a startling shade of blue-gray, like storm clouds over the mountains, and to her surprise they held no cruelty, no possessive gleam. Instead, she saw something that looked almost like sympathy. "Madam," he said quietly, tipping his hat, "my name is Cole Harrison. I have a wagon just down the street. If you would come with me, I will take you and your daughter somewhere safe." Victoria stared at him, trying to read deception in his features but finding none. Still, she had learned the hard way that men could not be trusted, that kindness was often a mask for darker intentions. "You just paid $200 for me," she said, her voice hoarse. "What exactly do you expect in return?" Cole Harrison's jaw tightened, and he glanced around at the dispersing crowd before returning his gaze to her. "I expect you to let me get you out of this damn town before something worse happens. We can discuss the details once we are on the road. Right now, every minute we stand here arguing is another minute those vultures have to reconsider their decision to let you go so easily." He had a point. Victoria could feel eyes on her back, could sense the resentment and thwarted desire emanating from the men who had been outbid. She nodded once, sharply, and allowed Cole to help her down from the platform. His hand on her elbow was firm but not rough, guiding rather than dragging. They walked quickly through the dusty street toward a sturdy-looking wagon hitched to two strong horses. Cole lifted a canvas bundle from the wagon bed and handed it to her. "There are some supplies in there, including milk for the baby if she needs it, and a blanket. The ride will be several hours. I have a ranch about 40 miles north of here, in the foothills." Victoria settled herself on the wagon seat, arranging Emma in her lap and pulling the blanket around them both despite the heat. She watched as Cole climbed up beside her and took the reins, clicking his tongue to get the horses moving. They rolled out of Genoa without fanfare, leaving behind the town that had treated her like property to be bartered and sold. For the first hour, they rode in silence. Emma dozed against Victoria's chest, exhausted from crying. The landscape rolled past, sagebrush and scrub pine, with the Sierra Nevada mountains rising in the distance. Victoria's mind churned with questions and fears, but she could not quite bring herself to break the silence. She was acutely aware of the man beside her, of the quiet competence with which he handled the horses, of the way his eyes constantly scanned the horizon as though watching for danger. Finally, Cole spoke. "I apologize for what happened back there, for what you had to endure. That auction was a disgrace, and the men who organized it should be horsewhipped." Victoria turned to look at him, surprised by the vehemence in his voice. "Then why did you participate in it? If you thought it was so wrong, why did you not just walk away?" "Because walking away would have meant leaving you and your daughter to a fate I would not wish on my worst enemy," Cole said flatly. "That rancher who was bidding, Jed Cutler, he has buried 3 housekeepers in the past 5 years. All of them died under suspicious circumstances. And the saloon owner, well, he has other plans for women in his employ that do not involve housekeeping." A chill ran down Victoria's spine despite the heat. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made her feel ill. "So you saved me," she said slowly. "But that still does not answer my question. What do you want from me?" Cole was quiet for a long moment, guiding the horses around a rough patch in the road. When he spoke again, his voice was careful, measured. "I have a ranch that I run with my younger brother, but we lost our housekeeper 6 months ago when she married a merchant and moved to Carson City. The place is falling into chaos without someone to manage the household. I need help cooking, cleaning, tending the vegetable garden. In return, I can offer you and your daughter a safe place to live, regular meals, and a fair wage. You would not be a slave or property, Mrs. Owens. You would be an employee, free to leave whenever you choose, though I would ask for reasonable notice. Victoria studied his profile, trying to detect any hint of dishonesty. You paid $200 for an employee you claim is free to leave. I paid $200 to prevent a grave injustice, Cole corrected. And yes, if that seems foolish to you, well, I have been called worse things than a fool. My brother will certainly have some choice words when he learns what I have done, but I could not stand by and watch what was happening. My mother raised me better than that. There was something in the way he said it, a fundamental decency that Victoria wanted desperately to believe in, even though her recent experiences had taught her that decent men were rare as gold nuggets in a river pan. What about your brother? Will he object to my presence? Caleb is 19 and more concerned with the horses than with household matters. He will be glad to have decent food on the table again. Our cooking has been, shall we say, uninspired. The corner of Cole's mouth quirked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. Despite everything, Victoria felt a tiny spark of something that might have been hope. I should tell you that I do not know what debts my husband actually owed. The men in town claimed it was nearly $1,000, but Thomas never spoke to me about his gambling or his borrowing. For all I know, they invented the sum to justify their actions. I would not be surprised, Cole said. Men like that see an opportunity and they take it. Law and justice be damned. Did you have any family in Genoa? Anyone who tried to help you? Victoria shook her head, feeling the old grief rise in her throat. Thomas and I came from Illinois 3 years ago, hoping to start fresh. His family had disowned him for marrying me. I was a seamstress, not good enough for their precious son. My own parents died of fever when I was 16. We were alone out here, which I suppose made me an easy target once Thomas was gone. I am sorry, Cole said, and the simple sincerity of it made Victoria's eyes sting with unshed tears. She could not remember the last time someone had shown her genuine kindness without expecting something in return. Emma stirred and began to fuss, her small face scrunching in preparation for a full wail. Victoria quickly reached for the supplies Cole had given her, finding a bottle of milk that was still cool from being stored in a wet cloth. She fed Emma while the wagon rumbled on, watching the landscape change as they climbed higher into the hills. How old is she? Cole asked, his voice softer as he glanced at the baby. 6 months. She was born in December, right as the first snows came. Thomas was happy when she arrived. He said she would change everything, that he would settle down and be responsible. Victoria's voice caught. He was dead 2 months later. What happened to him? If you do not mind my asking. Victoria was quiet for a moment, debating how much to share with this stranger who had purchased her freedom at such a high price. The official story is that he fell from his horse while drunk and broke his neck. But Thomas was an excellent rider, even when he had been drinking, and there were bruises on his body that did not match a fall. I think someone killed him, either because he could not pay his debts or because he knew something he should not have known. Cole's hands tightened on the reins. Did you tell the sheriff? The sheriff in Genoa is in the pocket of the same men who organized that auction. I learned quickly that there was no justice to be had, not for someone like me. The bitterness in her voice was sharp enough to cut. They fell silent again, but it was a different quality of silence now, companionable rather than awkward. Emma finished her bottle and Victoria burped her gently, then settled the baby against her shoulder where she could sleep more comfortably. The sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. We will reach the ranch just after sunset, Cole said. There is a small cabin about a quarter-mile from the main house where our previous housekeeper lived. It has 2 rooms, a fireplace, and a decent bed. You and Emma can stay there, have your own space. I will not intrude on your privacy." "Thank you," Victoria said softly. Then, because she needed to know, she asked, "Are you married, Mr. Harrison?" "No, madam." "Never found the right woman, and this life is not easy. A ranch in the foothills does not offer much in the way of society or comfort. Most women want something more." There was no self-pity in his voice, just a statement of fact. "Most women have not been sold at auction," Victoria replied with a touch of dark humor. "My standards for comfort have been significantly revised." That earned her a genuine smile from Cole, and she was struck by how it transformed his face, softening the hard lines and making him look younger, more approachable. "I suppose that is one way to look at it." As the sun set and the first stars began to appear, the Harrison Ranch came into view. It was a modest operation, as Cole had suggested, with a sturdy two-story ranch house, a large barn, several corrals, and various outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the distance, and Victoria could see horses in one of the nearer corrals. The small cabin Cole had mentioned sat slightly apart from the main house, nestled against a stand of pine trees. A young man emerged from the barn as they pulled up, lantern in hand. He had the same tall build as Cole, but with a leaner frame and lighter hair. This had to be Caleb. He approached the wagon with curiosity written all over his face. "Cole, where have you been? You left before dawn and I expected you back hours ago. I was starting to think." He stopped abruptly as his eyes landed on Victoria and Emma. "Who is this?" Cole climbed down from the wagon and then turned to help Victoria down, taking Emma so that Victoria could manage her skirts. "This is Mrs. Victoria Owens and her daughter Emma. They will be staying in the cabin, and Mrs. Owens has agreed to help with the household management." "Victoria, this is my brother Caleb." Caleb's eyes widened. "Where did you find them? And why did it take you all day to?" Understanding dawned on his face. "You went to Genoa. You heard about the auction." "I heard about the auction," Cole confirmed grimly, "and I did what needed to be done." "How much?" Caleb asked, his voice tight. 200. Caleb let out a low whistle and ran a hand through his hair. $200. "Cole, that is nearly all of our reserve fund. What if we have a bad winter? What if the cattle get sick? Then we will manage, same as we always do." "But I was not going to stand by and let those bastards—" Cole glanced at Victoria and moderated his language. "I could not let it happen, Caleb. You were not there. You did not see what they were doing." The brothers stared at each other for a long moment, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, Caleb sighed and turned to Victoria with an apologetic smile. "I apologize, Mrs. Owens. You have had a terrible day, and here I am going on about money. Welcome to the Harrison Ranch. I hope you and your daughter will be comfortable here." Victoria, still holding Emma, nodded. "Thank you. I promise I will work hard to earn my keep." "Let us get you settled in the cabin," Cole said. "Caleb, can you bring the supplies from the wagon? I will start a fire and make sure everything is in order." The cabin was small but clean, with whitewashed walls and simple furniture. The main room contained a table with 2 chairs, a rocking chair near the fireplace, and a small cooking area. The bedroom beyond held a wide bed with a quilt and a cradle that must have been left by the previous occupant. Cole worked efficiently to start a fire in the hearth, while Caleb brought in supplies, food, blankets, baby items that Victoria had not expected. "I stopped by the general store in Carson City yesterday," Cole explained when he saw her surprised expression. "I had heard rumors about what was planned for today, and I wanted to be prepared, just in case." "You planned this," Victoria said slowly. "You intended to buy me from the start." Cole straightened from the fireplace, brushing his hands on his pants. "I intended to stop an injustice, whatever form that took. I hoped I could appeal to the sheriff or find some legal recourse. But when I arrived and saw how things stood, I realized money was the only language those men would understand. Victoria sat down heavily in the rocking chair, Emma still in her arms. The full weight of the day was crashing over her now that she was somewhere safe, somewhere she could breathe. Tears pricked at her eyes and she blinked them back furiously. She had cried enough over the past 3 months. She would not break down now, not in front of these strangers who had shown her more kindness than she had any right to expect. "There is food in those baskets," Cole said gently. "Bread, cheese, some cold chicken. Please eat something and get some rest. We can talk more about the arrangements tomorrow. If you need anything during the night, the main house is just there. Do not hesitate to come get us." "Thank you," Victoria managed to say, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything." Cole nodded and gestured for Caleb to leave with him. At the door, he paused and looked back. "Mrs. Owens, one more thing. You are safe here. I give you my word. No one will hurt you or your daughter while you are under my protection." Then they were gone, and Victoria was alone with Emma in the quiet cabin. She fed the baby again, changed her diaper with supplies from the basket, and laid her in the cradle. Emma fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from the unusual day. Victoria forced herself to eat some bread and cheese, though her stomach was in knots. Then she sat in the rocking chair and watched the fire, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Cole Harrison was an enigma. He had spent $200 a fortune to save her from a horrible fate, but he asked for nothing in return except household work that he promised to pay her for. He spoke to her with respect, treated her like a person rather than property. It was so different from what she had expected, from what she had experienced in recent months, that she barely knew how to process it. She thought about his face in the firelight, the strong jaw and serious eyes, the way he had handled Emma with surprising gentleness for such a large man. He was handsome in a rugged way, probably in his late 20s, with the kind of quiet strength that came from hard work and harder choices. There had been no wedding ring on his finger. She had noticed that immediately. A bachelor rancher, living out here with his younger brother, trying to make a living from the unforgiving land. Victoria stood and moved to the window, looking out at the main house where lamplight glowed in the windows. Why had Cole really done this? Was it truly just about stopping an injustice, or was there something more? She wanted to believe in his stated motives, but trust did not come easily anymore. Thomas had taught her that people were not always what they seemed, that promises could be broken as easily as they were made. Still, she had no choice but to accept the situation for now. She was here, she was safe, and Emma was safe. Tomorrow she would begin earning her place, proving that she was worth the investment Cole had made. She would work harder than any housekeeper he had ever had. She would make herself indispensable. And perhaps, if she was very careful and very lucky, she could build a new life here for herself and her daughter. Victoria prepared for bed, washing her face in the basin of water Cole had left for her and changing into a nightgown from the bag of clothing that had been included in the supplies. Everything fit perfectly, which meant Cole had somehow known her size or had made very good guesses. She climbed into the bed and found it comfortable, far more so than the lumpy boarding house mattress she had been sleeping on in Genoa. Despite her exhaustion, sleep was slow to come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the auction block, felt the weight of those calculating stares. But she also saw Cole's face as he stepped forward with his impossible bid, heard the firmness in his voice when he promised she would be safe. Slowly, as the fire burned low and the night deepened, Victoria allowed herself to relax. For the first time in months, she felt the tight knot of fear in her chest begin to loosen. Just a little. Morning came too soon, announced by Emma's hungry cries. Victoria fed and changed her daughter, then dressed herself in the simple cotton dress that had been provided. She braided her dark hair and pinned it up, trying to look presentable and professional. This was her first day as the housekeeper of the Harrison Ranch, and she intended to make a good impression. She found Cole already up and working in the barn when she carried Emma over to the main house. He greeted her with a nod and showed her inside. The house was indeed in need of a woman's touch. Dishes were piled in the sink, dust covered most surfaces, and the smell of burned coffee permeated the kitchen. Victoria rolled up her sleeves and got to work. By the time Caleb stumbled downstairs an hour later, she had cleaned the kitchen, started fresh coffee, and was cooking eggs and bacon on the stove. Emma sat in a makeshift nest of blankets on the floor, playing contentedly with a wooden spoon. "Is that real food?" Caleb asked, staring at the stove as though witnessing a miracle. Victoria could not help but smile. "Sit down. Breakfast will be ready in a few minutes." Cole came in from his morning chores just as she was plating the food. The three of them sat at the table, with Emma gurgling happily from her blanket nest, and ate the first proper meal the brothers had enjoyed in months. The appreciation on their faces was so genuine that Victoria felt a warm glow of satisfaction. She could do this. She could make a place for herself here. Over the next few weeks, Victoria settled into a routine. She rose early to prepare breakfast, packed lunches for the brothers when they rode out to work the cattle, cleaned and maintained the house, tended the vegetable garden, and cooked substantial dinners. In her spare moments, she cared for Emma and slowly added personal touches to the cabin, making it feel more like a home. Cole was true to his word about treating her as an employee rather than property. He paid her wages at the end of each week, enough that she could begin saving money of her own. He was respectful but distant, never overstepping boundaries or making her uncomfortable. They spoke mostly about practical matters, what supplies were needed, what repairs the house required, whether the stove was working properly. But Victoria found herself watching him when he did not know she was looking. She noticed the way he was patient with the animals, the gentleness he showed when Emma reached for him with her chubby baby hands. She saw how hard he worked, from dawn until well after dark, and how he always made sure his brother ate properly and got enough rest. Cole Harrison was a good man, she realized. Truly good, not just pretending to be. It terrified her, how much she was starting to care about his opinion, how her day felt brighter when he smiled at her over breakfast, how her heart beat faster when their hands accidentally touched reaching for the same dish. She had sworn to herself that she would never trust another man, never make herself vulnerable again. But Cole was making it very difficult to keep that promise. One evening in late July, about a month after Victoria's arrival, a summer storm rolled in from the mountains. Thunder shook the cabin walls and lightning split the sky. Emma, who had never experienced such a fierce storm, woke screaming in terror. Victoria tried to comfort her, but the baby would not be consoled. She paced the small cabin, bouncing Emma and singing lullabies, but the thunder only grew louder and Emma's cries more desperate. A knock on the door made Victoria jump. She opened it to find Cole standing there, drenched from the rain despite the oilskin coat he wore. "I saw the lamp still burning and heard Emma crying. Is everything all right?" "The storm frightened her," Victoria said, raising her voice to be heard over the wind. "I cannot seem to calm her down." Cole stepped inside, water dripping onto the floor. He held out his arms. "May I?" Victoria hesitated only a moment before handing Emma to him. To her amazement, Cole began walking slowly around the room, holding the baby against his broad chest and humming a low tune. Emma's cries faded to whimpers and then stopped altogether. She stared up at Cole with wide eyes, one tiny fist curling into his shirt. "How did you do that?" Victoria asked in wonder. Cole smiled down at the baby. "My mother used to do this when Caleb was little and afraid of storms. She said the deep sound vibrates through them and makes them feel safe, like they are still in the womb hearing their mother's heartbeat." They stood there in the lamplight, the storm raging outside, and Victoria felt something shift inside her chest. This man who had saved her from a terrible fate, who treated her with respect and kindness, who could gentle a frightened baby with nothing but his presence, how was she supposed to guard her heart against someone like that? "Cole," she said softly, and he looked up from Emma to meet her eyes. The air between them suddenly felt charged with something that had nothing to do with the lightning outside. "I want to thank you for everything you have done for us. I know I have said it before, but I do not think you understand how much it means." "You do not need to thank me," Cole replied, his voice rough. "You work harder than anyone I have ever known. You have transformed this place. You have more than earned your keep." "That is not what I meant." Victoria took a step closer, her heart pounding. "You saved us. Not just from that auction, but from despair. From the belief that there was no goodness left in the world. You gave me hope again." Cole's eyes darkened with emotion. "Victoria," he began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with himself. "I should go. The storm is passing and Emma is calm now." But he did not move to hand the baby back, and Victoria did not step away. They stood frozen in that moment, the truth of what was growing between them hanging unspoken in the air. Then Emma yawned hugely, breaking the tension, and Cole carefully transferred her back to Victoria's arms. "Good night," he said, and his voice held a note of regret. He pulled his coat tighter and slipped back out into the dying storm. Victoria watched him go, then looked down at Emma, who was already drifting off to sleep. "What am I going to do?" she whispered to her daughter. "I think I am falling in love with him." The next morning brought awkwardness. Cole was quieter than usual at breakfast, and Victoria found herself fumbling with dishes and burning the toast. Caleb looked between them with raised eyebrows but had the good sense not to comment. After the brothers left for their work, Victoria threw herself into cleaning with unusual fervor, trying to scrub away the confusion and longing she felt. She was beating a rug on the porch when she noticed riders approaching. 3 men, strangers by the look of them, riding up the path to the main house. Something about the way they carried themselves made Victoria's skin prickle with warning. She quickly gathered Emma from her blanket on the porch and moved toward the barn where she knew Caleb was working with a horse. "Caleb," she called urgently, "there are men coming." Caleb emerged from the barn, took one look at the riders, and his face went hard. "Go back to your cabin and lock the door," he said. "Do not come out until I come get you." "What is wrong? Who are they?" "Just go," Caleb insisted, grabbing a rifle from just inside the barn door. "Now, Victoria." She ran, clutching Emma tight, and burst into the cabin. She locked the door and moved away from the windows, her heart racing. Through a gap in the curtains, she could see the 3 riders pull up in front of the barn. Caleb stood waiting for them, rifle held loosely but ready. The lead rider, a man with a scarred face and hard eyes, dismounted. Victoria could not hear what was being said, but the conversation looked heated. Caleb shook his head firmly at whatever was being demanded. The scarred man gestured angrily. His companions dismounted as well, spreading out in a way that looked threatening. Where was Cole? Victoria scanned the visible areas of the ranch but could not see him. He had ridden out to check on the cattle in the far pasture. He would not know there was trouble. Caleb was alone, outnumbered 3-1. The confrontation escalated. One of the men grabbed for the rifle and Caleb jerked it back, raising it to his shoulder. For a frozen moment, everyone was still. Then the scarred man held up his hands in a gesture of peace and backed away. He said something else, pointed toward the cabin, and Victoria's blood turned to ice. They were asking about her. Caleb positioned himself between the men and the cabin, his refusal clear in every line of his body. The scarred man smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. He nodded to his companions and they mounted up. As they rode away, the scarred man called back something that made Caleb's face go pale. Victoria waited until Caleb lowered the rifle and walked toward the cabin before she unlocked the door. "What did they want?" she demanded. "They are bounty hunters," Caleb said grimly. "Or that is what they claim, anyway. They said there is a reward being offered for information about your whereabouts. Someone in Genoa wants you back." The room spun. Victoria grabbed the doorframe for support. "A reward? But why? The auction is over. I was sold legally, horrible as that was." "I do not think this is about the auction," Caleb said carefully. "I think this might be about your husband's death. One of those men mentioned that you might have information about some missing money." "Missing money?" Victoria's mind reeled. "Thomas died owing money, not possessing it." "What are they talking about?" "I do not know, but we need to tell Cole as soon as he gets back. Those men did not leave because they were convinced. They left because they were outnumbered and outgunned for now. They will be back, probably with reinforcements." Victoria sank into a chair. Emma clutched against her chest. Just when she had started to feel safe, when she had begun to believe she could have a normal life, the past came roaring back to destroy everything. "I should leave," she said dully. "I am putting you and Cole in danger." "This is not your fight." "Like hell you are leaving," Caleb said fiercely. "Cole would shoot me himself if I let you run off with those vultures circling. We will figure this out together. The Harrison brothers do not abandon people who need help." Cole returned an hour later, and Caleb quickly filled him in on what had happened. Victoria watched Cole's face darken with anger as his brother spoke. When Caleb finished, Cole turned to Victoria. "Tell me everything you know about your husband's business dealings. Every name, every place, every conversation you can remember. Something got him killed, and now someone thinks you know what it was." Victoria took a shaky breath and began to talk. She told them about Thomas's gambling habit, about the various men he had borrowed money from. She described the arguments she had overheard, the late-night visitors to their small house, the way Thomas had become increasingly paranoid in the weeks before his death. There was one night, about a week before he died, when Thomas came home terrified, she recalled. He said he had seen something he should not have seen. He would not tell me what, but he kept saying we needed to leave Genoa, that we were not safe. But we had no money to travel, and Emma was so small. I convinced him to wait a few weeks until we could save enough for passage. I thought he was overreacting. I thought," her voice broke. "I thought we had time." Cole crouched in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. The warmth and strength of his touch anchored her. "This is not your fault," he said firmly. "Whatever Thomas saw, whatever happened to him, you are not responsible, but we need to figure out what this is about so we can protect you properly." "There was a strong box," Victoria said suddenly, a memory surfacing. "Thomas kept a small strongbox hidden under the floorboards in our house. After he died, I looked for it, thinking there might be some money or important papers inside. But it was gone. Someone had already taken it." "What do you think was in it?" Caleb asked. "I do not know. Thomas never showed me the contents, but he was very protective of it. And now that I think about it, those men who came to the house after his death, claiming he owed them money, they tore the place apart searching for something. They said it was to recover assets to pay the debts, but maybe they were looking for the strongbox." Cole stood and began pacing, his mind clearly working through the implications. So Thomas saw something, something worth killing for. He hid evidence of it in his strongbox. Then he was murdered and the box was stolen. But whoever took it did not find what they were looking for, which means they think you have it. But I do not have anything, Victoria protested. They searched my belongings before the auction. They took everything I owned. Did Thomas have any friends in town? Anyone he might have trusted with something important? Cole asked. Victoria thought hard. There was a man named Samuel Grant who ran the telegraph office. Thomas seemed to like him, spoke of him as honest, but I have not had any contact with him since Thomas died. I do not even know if he is still in Genoa. We need information, Cole decided, and we need to be prepared for those men to come back. Caleb, I want you to ride to Carson City and talk to the sheriff there. Tell him what is happening. Maybe he can send a deputy out here, or at least put pressure on the authorities in Genoa to investigate Thomas's death properly. I do not trust the law, Victoria said bitterly. The law let them auction me like livestock. The sheriff in Carson City is different, Cole assured her. James Martin is an old friend of our father. He is a good man and he has jurisdiction over these counties. If anyone can help, it is him. Caleb nodded and headed for the door. I will leave at first light tomorrow. That gives us tonight to prepare the ranch defenses. The two brothers spent the evening fortifying the property. They checked ammunition supplies, positioned rifles at strategic locations, and worked out a system for signaling if trouble arrived. Victoria helped where she could, her mind churning with guilt and fear. These men were risking themselves for her, and she hated that her presence had brought danger to their doorstep. That night, Cole insisted that Victoria and Emma stay in the main house rather than the isolated cabin. He set up a bedroom for them upstairs, across the hall from his own room. I will feel better knowing you are close, he said. If anything happens, I can get to you faster. Victoria settled Emma in a dresser drawer lined with blankets, an improvised cradle, and then sat on the edge of the bed, trying to calm her racing thoughts. A soft knock on the door made her look up. Cole stood in the doorway, silhouetted by lamplight. "May I come in?" he asked. She nodded and he entered, closing the door most of the way but leaving it cracked. Propriety even in crisis. He sat in the chair by the window, maintaining a respectful distance. "I want you to know something," he said quietly. "When I went to that auction, it was not just about stopping an injustice. I mean it was, but there was more to it." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "I had seen you before in Genoa. About 2 months ago, I was there selling some horses. I saw you at the general store with Emma. You were buying flour and the shopkeeper was being rude to you, making some comment about unpaid debts. You held your head high and counted out your pennies with such dignity, even though I could see how much his words hurt. I thought you were the strongest, most beautiful woman I had ever seen." Victoria stared at him, hardly able to breathe. "You remembered me. I could not forget you. When I heard about the auction, about what they were planning to do, I knew I had to stop it. I told myself it was about doing the right thing, and it was, but Victoria, I cannot lie to you anymore. I wanted to save you specifically. I wanted to bring you here. I wanted the chance to know you." "Cole," Victoria whispered, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything. I know your husband has been gone less than 6 months. I know you are not ready for anything. And with everything that is happening now, I should not have said anything at all. But with those men threatening you, with the danger we are facing, I realized I might not get another chance. I needed you to know that you matter to me. You and Emma both. I will do whatever it takes to keep you safe." Victoria stood and crossed to him, moving on instinct rather than thought. She took his hands and drew him to his feet. They stood close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the flecks of silver in his blue-gray eyes. "I am falling in love with you," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I did not want to. I tried not to, but you are everything Thomas was not. You are kind and honorable, and you treat me like I have value. How could I not fall in love with you?" Cole's breath caught. His hands came up to cup her face, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones with infinite gentleness. "Victoria, I have been in love with you since the moment you counted out those pennies in the general store. Everything since then has only made me love you more." He kissed her then, a soft press of lips that held all the longing and tenderness of the past months. Victoria melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, and for a moment the danger and fear fell away. There was only this, only the warmth of his arms around her and the steady beat of his heart against hers. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "When this is over," he said, "when you are safe and those men are dealt with, I am going to court you properly. Flowers and Sunday dinners and all the things you deserve." "I would like that," Victoria said, smiling through the tears that streaked her cheeks. A soft cry from the dresser drawer reminded them they were not alone. Cole released Victoria reluctantly, and she went to tend to Emma. He watched from the doorway as she changed the baby and settled her back to sleep, his expression full of such tenderness that Victoria felt her heart squeeze. "Get some rest," he said finally. "Tomorrow might be difficult, but I promise you, Victoria, we will get through this together." He left, pulling the door mostly closed behind him, and Victoria climbed into bed with her mind whirling. She loved Cole Harrison. He loved her. In the midst of all this chaos and danger, she had found something precious and rare. She was determined not to lose it. Caleb left at dawn as promised, heading for Carson City with a detailed letter from Cole outlining the situation. Cole and Victoria went about the day's work, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy even as they kept watch for any sign of the bounty hunter's return. Emma sensed the tension and was fussier than usual, requiring extra attention and comfort. In the afternoon, as Victoria was kneading dough for bread, Cole came in from the barn with a grim expression. "They are back, 5 of them this time. They are waiting at the property line." Victoria's hands stilled in the dough. "What do they want?" To talk, apparently. "They sent a man forward under a white flag." Cole's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "They want you to come out and answer some questions. They promise they will leave peacefully if you cooperate." "You know that is a lie," Victoria said flatly. "The moment I step outside this house, they will take me. I know. Which is why you are not going anywhere." Cole moved to the window and looked out toward where the riders waited. "I told their messenger that you are under my protection, and I will shoot any man who sets foot on my property uninvited. I gave them 1 hour to leave before I start making good on that promise. Cole, there are 5 of them. You cannot. I can and I will." He turned to face her, his expression fierce. "Victoria, I meant what I said last night. I will do whatever it takes to keep you safe. Those men are not getting near you." The standoff continued as the hour crept past. Victoria watched from the window, holding Emma, while Cole positioned himself with a rifle near the door. The 5 riders did not leave. Instead, they dismounted and appeared to be setting up a more permanent camp. They were preparing for a siege. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ranch, Victoria saw movement in the distance. More riders approaching from the direction of Carson City. Her heart sank. Reinforcements for the bounty hunters. They were outnumbered even more now. But then Cole let out a sharp laugh of relief. "It is Caleb, and he brought the cavalry." Victoria looked closer and saw that the new riders were indeed led by Caleb, but behind him rode at least a dozen men wearing deputy badges. At their head was a distinguished-looking man with a graying mustache who radiated authority. Sheriff James Martin had come himself. The bounty hunters saw the deputies coming, and there was a flurry of activity in their camp. They mounted up quickly, clearly debating whether to flee or stand their ground. In the end, the sight of official law enforcement made the decision for them. They rode off at a gallop, disappearing into the hills. Cole opened the door and strode out to meet the sheriff. Victoria followed, still holding Emma, relief flooding through her. Caleb dismounted with a grin. I told Sheriff Martin it was urgent. He rounded up every available deputy and we rode through the night. Sheriff Martin tipped his hat to Victoria. Mrs. Owens, I presume. Cole, Caleb, good to see you boys, though I wish it were under better circumstances. Now, suppose you tell me exactly what the hell is going on here. They gathered in the main house and Cole laid out everything they knew. Sheriff Martin listened intently, occasionally asking questions. When Cole finished, the sheriff sat back and stroked his mustache thoughtfully. I have heard rumors about corruption in Genoa, he said finally. That auction you described, Mrs. Owens, was illegal on several counts. The men who organized it will face charges. But this business with your husband is more complicated. If he witnessed something criminal and was killed for it, we are dealing with murder. And if someone thinks you have evidence of that crime, you are in serious danger. I do not have any evidence, Victoria insisted. I've told them that, but they do not believe me. The telegraph operator you mentioned, Samuel Grant, I know him. Good man. If your husband trusted him with anything, Grant would have kept it safe. Sheriff Martin stood. I am going to Genoa tomorrow with my deputies. We are going to turn that town upside down until we get some answers. In the meantime, I will leave 2 men here to guard the ranch. Those bounty hunters will not risk an attack with law enforcement present. Over the next 3 days, while deputies camped on the Harrison property, Victoria tried to maintain her normal routine, but tension hung over everything. Cole barely slept, always on alert for threats. Victoria found herself jumping at every unexpected sound. On the 4th day, Caleb came running from the road where he had been keeping watch. Riders coming, but it looks like the sheriff. Indeed, Sheriff Martin returned with his deputies and 1 additional man, a thin, nervous-looking individual with wire-rimmed spectacles. Samuel Grant, the telegraph operator, they assembled in the main house once again. Samuel Grant looked at Victoria with sympathy. Mrs. Owens, I am so sorry about Thomas. He was a good man who got mixed up in bad business. What bad business? Victoria asked urgently. Please, Mr. Grant, if you know anything, tell me. Grant reached into his coat and pulled out a leather-bound journal. Thomas gave this to me 3 days before he died. He said if anything happened to him, I should get it to the authorities, but I was afraid. The men involved are powerful, and I have a family to protect. I hid the journal and tried to forget about it. But when the sheriff came asking questions, I realized I could not stay silent anymore. Sheriff Martin took the journal and opened it. His expression grew darker as he flipped through the pages. This is detailed records of illegal land deals, fraud, embezzlement. Thomas documented everything he witnessed while he was working at the land office. Names, dates, amounts of money. This is enough to send 6 men to prison, including some prominent citizens of Genoa. That is why they killed him, Victoria said, pieces falling into place, and why they think I have this information. They assumed Thomas would have told his wife. The auction was probably meant to discredit you, Sheriff Martin said. If you were sold as property to satisfy debts, no one would believe anything you said about respected businessmen. You would have no standing to bring charges. But instead, Cole saved her, Caleb interjected. And now she is here out of their reach. Not anymore, Sheriff Martin said with satisfaction. With this evidence, I can arrest the men responsible for your husband's death, Mrs. Owens, and for the illegal auction. Justice will be served. Victoria felt tears streaming down her face. Thomas tried to do the right thing. He tried to expose the corruption, and it got him killed. But at least now his death will mean something. Cole put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her against his side. She leaned into his strength, grateful beyond words for his presence. Sheriff Martin and his deputies left the next morning, taking Samuel Grant and the journal with them. Within a week, word reached the ranch that arrests had been made. The men who had orchestrated the auction, the men who had likely ordered Thomas's death, were in custody awaiting trial. The bounty on Victoria's head had been rescinded. She was safe. For the first time since Thomas died, Victoria could breathe freely. The shadow of fear that had hung over her for months lifted, and she felt almost giddy with relief. Emma, as though sensing her mother's change in mood, became happier and more playful. Cole began his promised courtship, though they were already far past the formal stages. He brought Victoria wildflowers from the meadow, taught her to ride a gentle mare, sat with her on the porch in the evenings while Emma played at their feet. They talked for hours, sharing their pasts, their dreams, their fears. "I never thought I could feel this way again," Victoria confessed one evening as they watched the sun set over the mountains. "After Thomas, I thought I was done with love, done with trust." "Thomas hurt you," Cole said gently. "Not intentionally, perhaps, but his choices put you in danger and left you vulnerable. I cannot promise I will never make mistakes, Victoria, but I promise I will always put you and Emma first. I will protect you with my life. I know you will. That is why I love you." They married in September, a simple ceremony at the church in Carson City with Caleb and Sheriff Martin as witnesses. Emma, now nearly a year old and learning to walk, toddled down the aisle in front of Victoria, bringing smiles to everyone present. Victoria took the name Harrison with pride, finally able to leave behind the painful memories associated with her first marriage. She moved her things from the cabin into the main house, into Cole's room, and it felt like coming home in a way nothing else ever had. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Victoria's management of the household freed Cole and Caleb to focus on expanding the cattle operation. They hired additional hands, improved their stock, and began earning a reputation for quality beef. Money that had been tight became more comfortable. Plans were made to add onto the house, to build a proper school room for Emma and any future children. On their first Christmas together, Victoria was pregnant with their second child. Cole was overjoyed, his hands constantly drawn to the slight swell of her belly, his face filled with wonder. Emma, now walking and babbling in almost words, followed her stepfather everywhere, and he doted on her as though she were his own blood. "You saved us," Victoria said on Christmas night as they lay together in bed, the house quiet around them. "You gave us a family and a future." "You saved me too," Cole replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "This ranch was just a place before you came. Now it is a home. You brought light and love into my life, Victoria. You and Emma are my everything." Their son was born in July of 1870, a healthy boy they named Christopher Harrison. Cole wept when he held his son for the first time, overcome with emotion. Emma was fascinated by her new brother, gently patting his tiny head and declaring him Baby Chris in her toddler voice. The years passed in a blur of work and love and growing family. Victoria bore 2 more children, daughters named Grace and Rose. The ranch continued to thrive. Emma grew into a bright, confident girl who had no memory of the dark time before Cole came into their lives. She called him Papa and loved him without reservation. Caleb eventually married as well, bringing home a schoolteacher named Margaret who became Victoria's close friend. They built a house on the ranch property and started their own family, their children growing up alongside Cole and Victoria's. On their 10th anniversary, Cole took Victoria back to the spot where he had first seen her in Genoa. The town had changed significantly. The men responsible for the corruption and illegal auction had been convicted and imprisoned. New leadership had brought reform and prosperity. The place where the auction block had stood was now a small park with a memorial to justice. "You ever regret it?" Victoria asked as they stood hand in hand, watching their children play nearby. Emma was 12 now, already showing the beauty she would grow into. Christopher was a sturdy 9-year-old who followed his father everywhere. Grace and Rose, 7 and 5, were inseparable sisters. Regret what? Cole asked. Spending $200 on a stranger, taking on a woman with a baby, all the complications that came with it. Cole turned to her, pulling her close. His hair had some gray in it now, and fine lines creased the corners of his eyes, but he was still the strong, steady man who had stepped forward when she needed saving. "I regret nothing," he said firmly. "That $200 was the best investment I ever made. It brought me you. It gave me Emma and Christopher and the girls. It gave me a life filled with love and purpose. I would do it again 1,000 times over." Victoria kissed him there in the shadow of the memorial, her heart full to overflowing. She thought about the terrified woman who had stood on that auction block, sure that her life was over. That woman could never have imagined this future, this abundance of joy. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "Thank you for taking both of us home." "Always," Cole replied. "You were always meant to be mine, Victoria. From the moment I saw you, I knew. Some things are just destiny." They returned to the ranch as the sun set, their children racing ahead on their ponies, laughter echoing across the land. The Harrison Ranch stretched out before them, prosperous and peaceful, a testament to the power of courage and love. Victoria thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the depths of despair to this perfect happiness. She had been sold like cattle, treated as property, stripped of dignity. But one man had seen her humanity, had recognized her worth, and had been willing to pay any price to give her freedom. In saving her, Cole had given her everything. A home, a family, a love that would last all their days. And in return, she had given him the same. They had saved each other, really. Two people who found each other in the darkness and built something beautiful together. As they sat down to dinner that night, surrounded by their children and the family they had built, Victoria looked around the table and felt nothing but gratitude. This was what mattered. Not the pain of the past, not the injustices suffered, but the love that had triumphed over it all. Cole caught her eye and smiled, that special smile he reserved only for her, and Victoria smiled back. They had traveled a long road to reach this moment, but every step had been worth it. Every hardship had led them here, to this table, to this family, to this life they had created together. Outside, the Nevada sky blazed with stars, the same stars that had watched over them from the beginning. The ranch was quiet except for the lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through the pines. Inside, there was warmth and light and love. Victoria Harrison had been auctioned like cattle. Cole Harrison had said he would take both of them home. And in doing so, he had given her everything she never knew she needed: a second chance, a true love, and a happily ever after that was more perfect than any fairy tale. Their story became legend in the territory, told and retold as an example of how one person's courage could change everything. But for Victoria and Cole, it was simply their life, the beautiful reality they woke up to every morning. They had found each other in the darkest of circumstances and built something lasting and true. As the children were tucked into bed and the house settled into peaceful silence, Cole and Victoria stood on their porch and looked out over the land they had built together. His arm was around her shoulders, hers around his waist, fitting together as perfectly as they always had. "You remember what I promised you that first night in the cabin?" Cole asked quietly. "You promised I would be safe. I promised you would be safe while you were under my protection. I want to amend that now." He turned her to face him, his hands cradling her face with infinite tenderness. "You will be safe for the rest of your life, Victoria. I will protect you and love you until my last breath. This I swear." "I know," Victoria said, tears shimmering in her eyes. "I have always known. From the moment you stepped forward at that auction, I knew you were different. You were my miracle, Cole Harrison. And you were mine." They kissed in the starlight, two people who had found their way through darkness to light, through despair to hope, through fear to love. Behind them, their home glowed warm and welcoming. Inside, their children slept peacefully, safe and loved. Around them, the ranch they had built together stood as proof that goodness could triumph, that love could heal, that one moment of courage could change everything. Victoria Harrison had been saved by a cowboy who saw her worth when no one else did. Cole Harrison had been saved by a woman who taught him that love was worth any price. Together, they had built a legacy that would endure for generations, a legacy of courage, compassion, and love that conquered all. And they lived, as all the best stories go, happily ever after. Not in some distant fairy tale kingdom, but right there in the Nevada foothills, on a ranch called home, surrounded by the family they had created and the love that had saved them both. The auction that was meant to destroy Victoria had instead led her to her greatest joy. The $200 Cole spent that day bought him not property, but partnership. Not a servant, but a soulmate. Years later, when their grandchildren asked how Grandma and Grandpa met, Victoria would tell them the truth: she had been auctioned like cattle, and their grandfather had said he would take both of them home. She never sugarcoated it, never made it less than what it was. But she also told them about the love that came after, about how one person's kindness had changed everything, about how the darkest moments could lead to the brightest futures. And Cole would add, always with a smile, that it was the best $200 he ever spent, and he would do it again in a heartbeat. Because some things, some people are worth everything. The Harrison Ranch remained in the family for generations, each new inheritor learning the story of how it all began. The auction block was long gone, the men who built it forgotten by history. But the love story lived on, a reminder that courage and compassion could overcome even the darkest injustice, and that true love, when it finally arrived, was worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth everything. Victoria and Cole Harrison lived to see their great-grandchildren born, lived to celebrate 60 years of marriage, lived to know that the legacy they built together would continue long after they were gone. And when they finally passed, within months of each other as lifelong loves often do, they were laid to rest on a hill overlooking their ranch, under a headstone that read simply, "Together forever." Their story was complete. From the auction block to happily ever after, from terror to triumph, from strangers to soulmates. It was a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West, forged in adversity and lasting through all eternity. And every word of it was true.